The people cry peace, peace when there is no peace. Today we're going to talk about something pastors should know something about, although too often we have a hard time doing it ourselves, and that's apologizing, or perhaps more biblically speaking, making a confession, confessing. My name's Tom Arthur. I'm the pastor of Sycamore Creek, and I'm here with four of my friends, Luis Torres, Kurt Wright, and Coy Boye from three different churches. Tonight we're going to be watching some apologies. The NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell and Lansing Mayor Andy Shore have created apology videos in the last week. And Liberty University President Jerry Falwell Jr. apologized after tweeting a racist image of the governor from the governor's college yearbook that showed the governor wearing blackface. We got a couple of guests on the show today that we are honored are willing to help us reflect on what it means to be a Christian institution, to apologize or confess, or perhaps not. Marcie Abdullah is the mother of one of the Lansing Catholic High School four who took a knee during the national anthem to protest racism and eventually transferred to Holt High School after being benched in punishment for his nonviolent, peaceful protest. Matthew is her son, and Marcie's here with us. Mia, her daughter as well, transferred out of Lansing Catholic after experiencing backlash and racism towards her brother and herself as well. Before we get to confessing, though, I'd like to begin with the four of us talking a little bit more explicitly about why we chose the name Perspectives and the logo that we're using for this show, and why and how the four of us, why is it the four of us on here? Why is there not five? Why is there not three? Why is it two? Like, who picked the four of us? Where did we come from? So Kurt, what's the history of the four of us? Why are we here? You got to unmute yourself, Kurt.
Thank you. Rookie move once again. So about 3 years ago, man, CORE, which stands for Churches Organizing for Racial Reconciliation, was brought to Lansing. Crossroads was a big part of bringing it to Lansing. And really from the get-go, Pastor Luis, Pastor Coy, Pastor Tom, other pastors were kind of in the room of, hey, we have a vision for something. We're going to have an intense conversation with multi-churches about anti-racist movements. And so the first training we had was in 2017, and a lot of pastors were in it, and the four of us were in it.
It was a lively training.
Well, yeah, it was a lively training.
You had all those pastors in there, and we couldn't stop talking.
I've gone through the core training like 4 or 5 times. That was an epic one. It was epic. It was incredible. But yeah, so ever since then, we've been meeting about once a month to continue the conversation. Most of the times we're talking about race, but sometimes we're talking about marriage, and sometimes we're talking about pastoral care or whatever. So we've really grown a true brotherhood between the four of us. So.
Boy, I think you were the one, when we were talking about what to do in response to everything that was going on, you're the one who picked the name Perspectives. Why that name?
It was during that time that, you did that, right?
Yep.
Okay, all right. So it was during that time that all of what happened with the George Floyd case that we started talking about what was our response, what should we do, and trying to figure out, kind of what we should do. In that dialogue for about 45 minutes between the four of us, we started talking and we're given these different vantage points. And so as we were figuring out what we should do, and then when we figured out what we should do as far as we should get on Facebook Live and do a video, I came up with the name Perspectives because I felt like what people were going to hear when they heard us were different vantage points of how we saw race, of how we saw the George Floyd case, and even how we saw the peaceful protests, riots, and looters, like how we saw all that. And so I just said, hey, they're going to give 4 different perspectives, and that's probably, what we should call it, perspectives, because that's what we're giving. We're not giving, always all the facts, or we're not always giving the absolute truth, but we are giving a perspective of the truth that we all bring to the table.
I think since 2017, when we meet kind of privately and talked about all these things, we don't always agree on these things or other things. I mean, we're four
No.
pastors from four different Christian traditions and sort of theological and biblical ways of looking at the world and interpreting. But there was a shared desire for us to all engage this idea of racism and really fight against it.
Yeah.
Hey, Luis, it was your kind of artist who came up with the logo, and we went through a couple of renditions of it. Why the dove, with the olive branch and sort of broken in pieces?
Yeah, so with the death of George Floyd, we saw a lot of expressions of protesting, and we saw a lot of, because frankly, the African American community is not, so the African American community is hurting, and they're sick of what's going on, and not just the African American community, but I myself as a Puerto Rican and the Latinos, we've been seeing the migrants being treated unfairly, and we've been seeing just all these injustices in our world that we're just like, man, there is a lack of peace because there is a lack of justice. So when the George Floyd situation happened, there was a conversation of how pastors should be, speaking up about peace. And the artist actually, when he did perspectives, he actually had the dove whole and complete. But the truth is, if we look at scripture from Genesis to Revelation, when a land is void of justice, there is no peace. When a land is void of the justice of God, there is no peace. I mean, that's the whole eschatological message, right? That we're waiting for the Messiah to come back, to judge us, to bring justice to the world, so that we can live in peace with him for eternity. That's the whole message of the eschaton, of what we are expecting when the Messiah Jesus comes back again. But right now, as pastors continue to wrestle with this and continue to seek peace, that we have the realization that the peace right now is broken, and there is no peace because we lack justice. So here is four pastors coming together, trying to pick up the pieces of peace, and trying to say, hey, we need to seek justice in order for our land to be healed, and our land to have peace.
Man, I think you were just dropping some serious theological words on us there. Eschatological. I mean,
he said eschaton.
Eschaton. Is that like scatological humor or something?
I'm sorry, guys.
Listen, he paid a lot of money for the education. And we don't always get to use it. And so,
yes, and it all came out of pocket, baby. And it all came out of pocket. So just to explain, thank you, Tom, for acknowledging that. The eschaton is our hope, right? It's our hope that Jesus is going to come back. It's the eschatology is the study of the end times. So it focuses on the end times, and that's something that we don't talk much about in Christian circles nowadays, But the truth is that we're still waiting. I'm waiting. I don't know if you are, but I'm waiting. Yeah. I'm waiting for Jesus to come back and to set things straight, that we're going to be judged by a righteous God. I posted on Facebook yesterday a verse that for Paul, right before he got beheaded, he was speaking to Timothy that he was that he's going to receive a crown of righteousness, right? A crown of righteousness, and not just him, but all who long for his coming, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm longing for his coming. I'm longing for Jesus to put things. Yesterday, Maria and I watched the movie Just Mercy, and we just ended up in tears. Maria and I just ended up in tears. I don't like watching those movies because I know a lot about, the history of racism in our country, and frankly, I don't like to relive a lot of those things, But I was like, man, I got to watch this movie because it's just amazing. And so anyway, we watched the movie, and then we were just crying together, and we were just in tears. And we just came to the conclusions, why are we so obsessed with smoke screens? Why are we so obsessed with whether the victim was, or and we talked about this with the perspectives with Candace Owens, and we're just so obsessed with smoke screens and politics and debates and who wins the debate so we can win. I said, win the trophy of egoism, right? That we forget that Jesus, what matters is people. What matters to God is people. So anyway, sorry, I kind of went on a tangent there, but
you're speaking all of our theological language. I'm ready to dive into like whether your eschatology is realized or delayed or already but not yet or whatever.
Yeah,
that's another.
We were just praying. We were praying last night. We were praying because we kind of had this hopeless feel, right? And we were just praying last night. Lord, come. Lord, come. Bring your justice. Judge us accordingly. I'm tired. Come, Lord God. And that was my prayer yesterday.
So, Kurt, when we were trying to figure out what to do with this, you had this prayer or request for prayer come in from kind of a very well-known Christian leader in our nation, asking prayers for patience and peace. After this police brutality, patience and peace. And I think like what Luis was talking about as far in our conversation about whether the dove should be whole or broken,
right.
That was a significant part. You're like, man, we can't just pray for patience and peace. Why can't we just pray for patience and peace?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, think about it from the theological, how do we reconcile to God? It's through confession and repentance, which brings us peace and brings us reconciliation, which then brings about peace. The final outworking of the gospel is peace with God. You don't start with peace with God. You start with conviction of the Holy Spirit, which leads to repentance. I'm sorry. I like, woe is me. I'm a sinner. And then you turn in action and repentance, as all good pastors know, it's a 180-degree turn, going the other way. It's a different direction. So it's not just saying you're sorry. And so you can't just say, oh, let's have peace. What's that?
You're jumping the gun here. That's our topic tonight.
Yeah, no, exactly. But that's just false peace to say, hey, let's just pray for peace. Well, what about praying for reconciliation? What about praying for forgiveness and patience? Man, I think of Jesus, flipping over tables like in the temple on a high holiday. Why did he do that? Well, he saw injustice. He saw people coming from out of town being ripped off by, people, whatever. And he's like not having that. So was Jesus not being patient when he was flipping over tables? No. He had the virtue of patience, but he also had the virtue of love, ultimately, which is I'm not going to let vulnerable people or whoever be oppressed. And therefore, I'm flipping over the tables of the powerful.
Yeah.
And the question comes, patience for who? Because it's been 400 years.
Yeah, exactly.
It's been 400 years of patience. That same narrative was preached with MLK, where they told MLK over and over again, hey, these things take time. That was in the 60s.
Yeah.
Right. We're in 2020. So how much more patience do we as a nation have to have?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, man. We've gotten into being pastors here right off the bat. So I'm gonna pull us back to the news stories because we really wanted to talk. We wanted to connect from a pastoral perspective on the situation of what's happening today, and give you 4 perspectives as pastors. So there are so many news stories we could talk about. This is the problem of doing this once a week, guys. There are so many stories we could talk about. There's the movement to defund the police, which has gotten significant traction in Minneapolis as they've got this veto-proof a number of council members who are willing to defund the police in Minneapolis. I mean, we may see like some really radical, creative things going on in Minneapolis. There's the Democrats' bill for police reform. There's the saga of trying to remove the Robert E. Lee enormous giant thing in Richmond, Virginia. I spent a summer in Richmond, Virginia, by the way, working at a church there.
Did you see the statue?
I did see the statue. Yeah. That's the Confederate capital. So there's so much in and around that area.
So like you intentionally went to go see it, huh?
you don't have to intentionally go see it. It's just there. Like you just drive and like there's all kinds of statues like that.
I'm just wondering, you know, I'm just trying to see where your heart's really at.
You know, all right, we're talking confessions tonight. I have a confession. Sarah and I did do a tour of plantations. I mean, this is totally going to throw us off track, probably. I'm sorry. We did a tour of plantations, and one time we went then and sat on a picnic. Like there's this plantation you could sit by the James River, and later on we thought, what in the world? Like none of our black friends would go sit on a lawn in front of a plantation by the James River. Like that would that is not.
Not and have a picnic, no.
Yeah.
Maybe go sit and cry and
yeah.
Like, but you over there eating a sandwich. That's fine.
I guess I wasn't quite as woke at that point.
Well, stop telling that story, okay? Don't tell nobody else that story.
All right. Well, we'll edit that out. So NASCAR banned the Confederate flag. I mean, that's enormous.
That is.
That's huge. I mean, this is NASCAR. We could talk about that. But I think what we've tried to do is we've tried to make this show really local. It's like, you know, there's these national trends and then they play out on a local level here in Lansing. So we've decided to talk about the broader topic of confession and apology because we've seen it play out locally and nationally. And we're going to start with 2 video clips here. The first, after a, at best, unprepared meeting with Black Lives Matter on Zoom last week, watched by, you guys got a kick out of me saying 3,000 people. At best, it was an unprepared Andy Shore meeting with them. At worst, is the beginning of the end of Mayor Shore's.
Wow.
Because he was asked, he's still being asked to resign. Mayor Shore issued an apology video. So we're going to watch that apology, and then we're going to ask the pastors for a gut check here. Did he nail it or did he fail it? All right. So here's Mayor Shore trying to make an apology.
The Lansing community, like communities all over the country, is going through tremendously hard times. Tensions are high right now. It's been the perfect storm, living through a global pandemic and witnessing the horrific police brutality and killing of George Floyd and other members of the African American community. Part of the dialogue that we're having in the Lansing community took place last night when I participated in a Black Lives Matter forum. I intended to come to the forum to listen, and I wasn't prepared for the questions asked by the other panelists. I'd like to apologize for coming unprepared to the conversation. Important ideas were shared with me that I need to hear, and important questions were asked of me and the City of Lansing, and they deserve to be responded to. I hear you, and I'm listening. I owe it to the residents of Lansing to come with an open mind and open ears as we move forward. I'd also like to apologize to Mr. Michael Lynn Jr. In the heat of the conversation, I failed to acknowledge what you said about the death of AJ, a person who is dear to you. I'm sincerely sorry for your loss. I will admit I don't have all the answers. And I will admit I'm a white man and I haven't lived the life of someone who is racially profiled. I need leaders in the community to come together so that we can all be part of these important conversations that are long overdue. Not only do these difficult discussions need to be had, we also need to make sure that the proper steps and actions are taken as a result. I've called upon the Mayor's Diversity and Inclusion Council to help me plan a community-wide town hall. I've been contacted by a number of community leaders who would like to be a part of this process. This is a step that we must take so that we can come together and develop a plan as a community. I'll listen to those who want to share their experiences and ideas, and I'll attempt to answer any questions that people want answers to. This town hall is not the end, but another step toward our ultimate goal of wholeness and equity. The details for the first town hall are being worked out now, and I'll share them as soon as they're ready. Change is hard. It's sometimes uncomfortable, and it's imperfect. I'm imperfect. I'm focused on doing better every day, and you all hold me accountable. I appreciate that. I'm committed to improvement for myself, for everyone in our community, and our region. We all want a different, better future, and we can get there by working together. Thank you.
All right, so there's the mayor apologizing. I feel like if we had really a lot of money and like a on-screen producer, we could like make this little tally mark up here, like for each of us, like whether he nailed it or failed it, but you're just gonna have to pretend that logo exists up there. But Luis, let's start. Just real quick, gut check, nailed it or failed it?
Man, I've been struggling with this one particularly a lot. I'm gonna go failed it. The reason why I say right, there you go. The reason why I said failed it was a couple things. You could tell that he doesn't have people of color really speaking into his decision making. This is the reason why. He's, a couple things that I saw of him saying is, I want to organize a town hall meeting, right? In the actual in the Black Lives Matter forum, he kept alluding to that and kept alluding to the sheriff and kept alluding to, let's all come together. Let's all come together. The reason why I have an issue with that is people of color don't make it to town hall meetings. Generally, the population that really makes it to town hall meetings and to local voting and so on and so forth is the white population. And I'm not saying that we are not capable of doing it, but sometimes we don't even know stuff like that is happening, right? So by saying, hey, we need all voices, no, we don't need all voices in this. I think that you really need to listen to the Black voices in this one. I'm not saying to ignore the white voices or ignore the brown voices, or I'm not saying to ignore that. I'm just saying the Black voices are screaming something, and you continue to keep failing to listen, and I just think that he just needs a little bit more consideration to those voices of color around him. And if he doesn't have them, he should get them as soon as possible.
All right, Kurt, real quick, nailed it or failed it?
I definitely have to go with failed it as well. Anytime your apology includes "I'm not perfect," I mean, come on. That never include that in an apology. That's a given. That is a given. You don't have to include that. So, I give him like a star of like, thanks for trying. Like, but I really appreciate what Lee said. He needs to listen to people of color. He should have apologized specifically for my defensiveness, how I deflected the questions, hey, I apologize for not taking you, Angela, seriously a year ago when you sat in my office with the Kellogg Foundation and gave me a clear path. I apologize for not having actionable steps from that meeting, because the frustration is, hey, we've talked to you for a year and you want to continue talking. And so, it almost sounds like Andy Shore has de-invested, not invested. So, and he kept saying in the meeting, I'll listen. Let's have the conversation. I'll listen. But what he should have said is, that's a good idea right there, Mike. Hey, Michael, that's a good idea right there. He kept like pushing the listening down the road. Let's have that conversation. I'll listen one day. Opposed to Mike's like, I got the ideas right now. Can you do this? And he's like, I'll listen to that. Okay. So for those reasons, those are a few. He didn't nail it, that's for sure.
All right, Coy, nail it or fail it? I mean, 2 on the fail it side.
That's right. I'm gonna say he finailed it.
Before you say that, a lot of people on Facebook are commenting that nailed it or failed it might be 2 extremes, right? And that's kind of how I felt a little bit too about, there is kind of like, there are some things that he said that were good and some things that he said that were, so, but anyway, yeah. So I hear you, Coy.
About AJ, his brother, that was legit. I mean, I feel like the words that he said, that was legit. I mean, right. So like on a 10-point scale, I'm thinking like 3.
Yeah.
Let's let the black man talk, all right? You guys already got your chance.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Appreciate that. So,
Good use of your white privilege, Tom. Good use.
So I say he finessed it because I think that when I saw the video the first time through, I thought, man, whoever is working with him on his campaign or his political side, politically smart move. The words he chose to use, for the most part, I thought were really well written, and I thought he read them very well. So he acknowledged not being prepared. He acknowledged he should have listened. He even acknowledged the fact that he needed to be held accountable. And while the apology to Michael Lynn, I thought was a little extra, I didn't think it was really needed, but he made it even more personal. So from the standpoint of like what he said, when he said it, because he said it right away after a day or two after everything had happened. And I think that he chose really good words. I think he failed it. So he nailed it there from a political move. It was smart. I think he failed it because it didn't seem authentic. Like I didn't really feel like those were his words, nor did I feel great authenticity behind them as he read them / communicated them. And so from that standpoint, while I think he picked a lot of right words, I don't think it was a perfect thing, but he picked a lot of right words, it wasn't totally believable.
Yeah.
But it was it was very much a political move in my opinion. Yeah. So it was smart, but I don't know that it had the type of authenticity behind it that I would have liked to have seen.
All right, I'd like to just point out to our Facebook audience that I tried a 10-point scale with Pastor Sean last week, and
yeah,
I got reamed for that. So tonight I went with nailed it or failed it. Okay, instead of like on a 10-point scale, 10 being that he, was positive and won, and then all of you nailed it or failed it. Okay, and Coy is straddling the fence. I agree, Coy. Yeah. I thought I felt like it lacked emotion. It felt like maybe a speechwriter wrote it, but it didn't feel like it was him. It felt like he was reading somebody else's words to me. And plus what everybody else said. So the Michael Lynn thing seemed like the best part of it, but the rest of it seemed like a failure to me. All right, we got one more apology video, and if we all talk this much, our show's going to go that really long tonight. Okay, guys. So we got Andy Shore. I think our panel gave him a solid 3.5 on the fail side and a half a point on the nailed it side. But what about the NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell? Am I saying his name right?
No.
I thought it was Goodell.
It's Goodell.
This tells you how much I know about football.
Sports.
I've just failed the man test now, not being able to pronounce the NFL Commissioner's name properly. But here is Roger's apology from the NFL.
It has been a difficult time for our country, in particular, Black people in our country. First, my condolences to the families of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and all the families who have endured police brutality. We, the National Football League, condemn racism and the systematic oppression of Black people. We, the National Football League, admit we were wrong for not listening to NFL players earlier and encourage all to speak out and peacefully protest. We, the National Football League, believe Black lives matter. I personally protest with you and want to be part of the much-needed change in this country. Without Black players, there would be no National Football League. And the protests around the country are emblematic of the centuries of silence, inequality, and oppression of Black players, coaches, fans, and staff. We are listening. I am listening. And I will be reaching out to players who have raised their voices and others on how we can improve and go forward for a better and more united NFL family.
All right, Kurt, you got the ball. It's
I'll try to be sustained here.
First and long, okay?
Yeah.
Did nail it or fail it?
Man, I'm uncomfortable with these extremes now. I'm not an extreme person. I'm always in the middle. I really appreciated what the things that he said about there is systematic oppression. We were wrong. That's very clear. We were wrong. Black Lives Matter. I mean, that's kind of a low bar to admit these things. Centuries of inequality. I am listening. So I appreciate that. At the end of the day, I would have to say he failed because he did not mention the elephant in the room. I mean, Colin Kaepernick was one of the elite NFL players in the league. Was just at a Super Bowl. I should have looked this up, but probably 2015, 2016. He's out of the league by 2017 because he kneels in protest. Not to mention the backstory of talking to a Navy SEAL or something like that about the first time he protested, he sat on the bench and then he talked to someone that was in the Army, a white guy, and they had this conversation, and he said, even a more respectful way to protest would be to kneel. Like, when is kneeling disrespectful? And he's banned, pushed out of the league because white owners don't want, it got all the way up to the president, right? Like, don't want the inmates running the jail. That's essentially what was said. So you got to name that. That's the biggest grievance here. And yeah, they should have listened. Yeah, they should have listened. So he failed it as well.
All right, Coy.
I have to say, for Roger Goodell, I think he actually nailed this one, because I saw a video, I believe the day or two before, black NFL football player saying, "What if it was me? Then would you have acted differently?" And I believe that they tell him the statements that they want him to make. And so some of the statements that he makes up front are, I think, almost verbatim, if I remember correctly, of what they asked him to say. So in that sense, even though it's someone else's words, it's the words that they asked him to say, and he acknowledges that. And then he does add to it some of the other things as far as, we were wrong. He talked about systemic racism. I do wish that Colin Kaepernick would have got more of a shout out. And until Colin Kaepernick gets an apology and a shout out, I think the NFL needs to take another step. But I think as a first step, because I think he was saying exactly what he was asked to say by black players, that's why I think he nailed it.
Mm-hmm. I didn't know that piece. You've done a little more research on our topic tonight than I.
Well, again, I heard the video. I saw a video like the day before, and I just remember them kind of saying, "We want you to say these things," and then the next day when he says, I'm like, that sounds just like. And I don't know for a fact, but I just feel like those were the expressions they wanted him to make.
Yeah. All right, Luis, nailed it or failed it?
All right, so I'm going to preface this by saying that I am a little biased when it comes to this topic. The reason why is because, one, NFL is my least favorite sport, or football is my least favorite sport. Now, I know that's, for many people out there, they're like, "What, Luis? The NFL or the football, whatever." But let me tell you why. I think there's systemic racism in every sport. Right? I want to preface that. But the NFL is very, very racist. I remember as a kid, for the first time from Puerto Rico, coming and seeing the NFL Combine for the very first time. And you saw all these white men measuring and looking at these specimens, black NFL players. And right away, even as a kid, I just felt weird. I felt weird about it, even as a kid. So that's always something that kind of has turned me off of the NFL. Now, this particular apology, I would say failed. The reason being is that they didn't address Colin Kaepernick directly. I think that it wasn't just the NFL players, but Colin Kaepernick started that movement, and they did him wrong. And one of the things I know that this is a big debate about the whole flag. Like I told you guys, I come from a military family, and none of my family took offense to it. So none of my family, we never understood the argument or the debate. We're just like, it's a guy kneeling, he's protesting, and that's an American right. Anyway, I never, it never went through it never got to my mind of why is this offensive to people, specifically my family being from a military family. I don't get it. I've never gotten it. But I think that the apology needed to be a little bit more direct. That's why I say failed.
Yeah. I think I'm going with he finailed it. Boy, I really like your insight that if this was what he was being asked to say, I felt like he emoted it better than Andy Shore did.
I do too.
But Andy, I don't know. This is a little hard on Mayor Shore. These are not actors who are used to being in front of screens, and all of us get a little stiff when we're trying to do something. So, but I think he sold it a little more authentically. And if people if this was what he was asked to say by black players, that speaks a lot to me. I didn't get the sense that Shore asked black community what his apology should include. I mean, maybe he did, and maybe I'm not giving him enough credit for that. But then I agree with you all. The elephant in the room was Colin Kaepernick, and just to ignore that was it felt like more maybe protecting the NFL from lawsuits than a genuine apology or confession. All right, so you got 4 pastors' perspectives on some apologies tonight, and we have a special guest with us tonight. Marcie Abdullah is with us. Marcie, you want to come on our show? I know you're out there waiting to join in the conversation. We appreciate you hanging in the wings with us tonight. Marcie went through this whole thing on a local level as the mother of a student Matthew, who knelt at the Lansing Catholic High School's football game and then was benched, and eventually experienced a lot of backlash for that and racism, and transferred to Holt High School. And somewhere in that process, Marcie, you ended up at our church, and you and your family have been a real blessing to us. But give us a little history, of the situation that happened down at LCHS.
Okay. I did take some notes because I could talk on this for hours and hours. So I took some notes so I would do a quick.
Babies.
Pardon?
These are your babies that were.
Yes. And it was a time. It was a struggle. But in terms of a timeline of kind of what happened, it was Matthew's senior year, varsity football player. He was a starter. They had an away game at Fowlerville, and one of the players, Michael Lynn's son, was Matthew's teammate, and he had decided he was going to take a knee at the game. And he was probably just going to do it by himself. He had mentioned it to a few people, but he just felt like he needed to do that. The school found out and talked to him and said, "This is an away game at Fowlerville. I don't know that this is going to be a good time to do that. That could be unsafe. That could be not a good idea." And so he said, "Fine." And he said, "But I don't want to stand for the anthem." So he went into the locker room with the athletic director, and he said, we will address this. Just let's not do it here. And we'll address this as a team next week. So he was fine with that. In the course of the game, he was called the N-word at least once on the field. And he said something to the ref about it. And the ref got in his face. And then the coach pulled him. And we were, right behind the home bench, and see him come off the field and get reamed out by the coach. Of course, we don't know what has happened on the field, but we can see him getting reprimanded. And so the game went on, and afterward, Matthew chose not to ride the bus home and rode home with me. and was just more fired up than I'd ever seen him. He was so angry. He said, he told me I didn't know anything about that Mikey was going to kneel, any of that. He explained all that, and then said, and he got called the N-word, and the coach didn't listen to him. He came off and tried to let the coaches know what had happened, and they told him to shut up, basically. And didn't address it with the other team. The parents talked to him. And so Matthew was incensed. Matthew's like, so we've been told we can do this next week. I'm going to do it. And for Matthew, that was very out of character. Matthew was quiet. Not quiet with his friends, but he was never one that wanted the spotlight, unless it was on the field or the track or the court. He liked to shine there, but he was not into public speaking, didn't kind of put himself out there, stand up. If I would try to talk about racism, it was like, Mom, it's fine. Mom, it's fine. And he was a, fine student, didn't get in trouble, but just kind of flew under the radar. So I was surprised. I was pleased that he was wanting to do this, but I was surprised. So come the next practice, they had a meeting. The athletic director was there, the principal was there, the whole team, the coaches, and they came up with a plan as a team. The kids talked, and they decided this Friday, the players that wanted to take a knee were going to kneel. The ones that didn't were going to stand. They were going to all link arms so that they were still united. There was a plan of they were going to say something, and then they were going to play. So Matthew came home for practice, said that was the plan. I was shocked, but I was like, okay, then we get a call. There's a team meeting or parent meeting that Wednesday. And we're told in no uncertain terms, they will not be kneeling on the field. There will be consequences if they do. This is not the expectation we have here. It's not going to happen. And this came from the president of the school, and the superintendent was there also. And they just said, no, this goes against the expectations. There's going to be consequences. And we're not taking questions. This is not a discussion. This is what's going to happen on Friday. Friday being homecoming on the brand new $1 million turf field at Lansing Catholic. And I couldn't keep my mouth shut. And at that meeting too, they totally targeted one family, acted like it was one player that was being a troublemaker, starting all of this, not acknowledging to the other parents that it had been a team discussion. At the meeting, there were about 12 people, including one of the trainers, that were planning to take a knee at the game. After the meeting Wednesday, and I said, what are the consequences? Well, we don't know, but there will be consequences. And I said, well, we need to be able to go home and talk to our children, and so they can make an informed decision. Is this worth it? What is going to happen? No, we don't know. So, and the boys really never talked about it after that. There was little conversations, and I kept kind of checking in with Matthew. So what are you going to do? What are the other kids going to do? And he said, Mom, if now I don't do it because they said there were going to be consequences, then that just means it wasn't important. What was the point of doing it if now that there's going to be a punishment, it doesn't matter? He's like, no, it's more important than that. I'm still going to do it. He's like, I don't know who else still is. So then they had, the next practice was Thursday before game day. And the coach said, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what the consequences are going to be, but who is planning to take a knee tomorrow? And Matthew and 3 other teammates all said that they were, and they didn't know beforehand. I texted Matthew before practice, and at that point, he didn't know who was going to do it, who wasn't. They weren't a close group of friends, the 4 of them, and they didn't know. And all of the parents really weren't sure either. we had each, told our kid we'd support them, but that it was up to them. And so the four of them raised their hand and said, I'm going to take a knee. And so the coach, they were going to do their run through for the game. And they said, okay, so-and-so, you're going in for Matthew, because all four of them were starters. It was a starting quarterback. Matthew was the starting receiver. They all started. And so he said, so-and-so 7 for you. Like, they did the walkthrough and just put them to the side. Nothing said after that. So at that point, I let the State Journal know. We had been in contact with them, and I said, they've been benched. Like, they just had their place. People put in their place for the run through. Still not heard anything from the school about consequences. No one's talked to the boys. We went up to the school, the 4 parents, wouldn't tell us anything. Eventually, just before the game, they told us that they wouldn't start, and that would be the consequence. But they tried to meet with us all 4 individually, and we said, no, we're in this together. You're not going to divide and conquer here. And so they said they would get to play, but they would not start. And I think a few of them went in after the first quarter. Matthew didn't go in till the second half. And then it ended up really being like that for the rest of the games. The consequences didn't escalate, but they weren't able to start. And the rest of the games, and we can, as parents, we said to them, okay, so what are you going to do next week? Like, it was really, and they're like, we're going to keep doing it. And they did. And their teammates and friends really turned on them. Even the players that had planned to take a knee originally gave them a hard time and said, come on, this is dividing the team, and there's consequences now. This is stupid. It's not worth it. You shouldn't do it. But they stuck to it. And things got ugly. I mean,
kudos to you.
Put in my shirt. We got these made as soon as they decided.
Kudos to you, Mom, for raising a young man who would be willing to stand for what he believed was right, even in the midst of some consequences that are very rough for a teenager. You said that was his senior year, or was that his junior year?
Senior.
In his senior year, because I'm sure that was very challenging, and I'm sure at the time was very trying for you as his mother to see him suffer like this for doing what is right. So kudos for allowing him the space to make that decision, then supporting him in that decision, and in some sense, even showing us a level of respect towards the school and the team, because some parents would have said, oh, my son's not playing? Hey, he ain't going to be in practice next week. And so you still allow him that responsibility of you're still a part of this team.
Uh-huh.
And as long as they're not kicking you off, then, because I think it's a certain level of strength too, emotionally and psychologically. So I applaud.
We didn't know if they were going to be suspended from school. We really had no idea. At that time, Matthew was planning to play football in college. And we spoke to his college coach, before, any of this got out, to say, this is what's happening. And they said, we fully support him in that.
Marcie, I think like all kinds of institutions are coming out with statements of support that Black Lives Matter. And I think somebody told me that they were walking through Walmart and over the speakers came like this statement that Black Lives Matter. It's like every institution is coming out with these statements. It feels a little bit like when COVID-19 hit. All of a sudden you got emails from every group you've ever given your email.
Spirit Airlines, this is what we feel.
Yeah, like Werther's lozenges sent me an email. I'm just kidding.
Listen, I'm just glad the rest of y'all caught up. I always knew Black Lives Matter.
And I saw a post, Marcie, that you shared on your Facebook that was about Lansing Catholic High School put out one of these statements as well.
Mm-hmm.
And you had a kind of you had a very specific reaction to that. perhaps in response to an apology or lack of apology. Share with us a little bit about how that hit you.
Yeah, so the first I saw the letter that they put out to families was online. I'm not on their email list anymore. And somebody I knew posted it. Actually, one of the other moms, Roger's mom, posted it online. And I, as I say often now, it was almost unbelievable.
Wow.
3-4 years ago, I would have said unbelievable, but to me nowadays, like, really nothing is unbelievable. But it just, it talked about the sin of racism, and we stand with our students of color, and we want to listen, and we want input, and all those things. But to this day, 2.5 years later, there's been no apology to the 4 players, to their families. Right after football season, Mikey left, transferred to Sexton. Matthew made it till about
You said Sexton?
what?
You said Sexton?
That's where Mikey went back to Sexton. Mikey started at Sexton and transferred to Lansing Catholic.
You're talking boys language now.
He left Sexton for Lansing Catholic and then went back.
It's a huge mistake. So
yeah.
glad you got to rectify that.
I think he learned that. I think he would definitely agree. And Matthew stuck it out until Thanksgiving, and couldn't. I mean, he couldn't hack it anymore. And I mean, he had no ties to Hope. I teach in Hope, so he was able to transfer there mid-year, and but in the process, he forfeited his senior track season, which he was going to be running track in college also. That was really his favorite sport. And because he transferred, he wasn't eligible. And he knew that going into it, but it was still like, it wasn't worth it to stay. And then my daughter, who was a sophomore at the time, planned to finish out the year at least, and she made it till February. And by February, I was getting daily texts from school, like, I can't stay here. I can't do it.
Wow.
Yeah. And so she transferred. She just now graduated from Hazlitt, which was a great move for her. Things worked out, but still no apology. And the 4 boys did a letter after the first or second game, and they took a knee, to the administration with a list of demands. Really, this is explaining why they were doing it, and really emphasizing the changes they wanted to see in the school, even though 3 of the 4 were seniors. They're like, these changes we're asking for aren't going to impact us. Like, this is for the students that are still there and the students coming. We want you to do more training for the teachers. We want you to have a more diverse staff. We're asking that, these things short-term, these things long-term. And one of the very first thing was an apology for vilifying them. I mean, they really threw them under the bus, and made them look like they were just troublemakers.
Yeah.
Marcie, you honor us tonight by joining us. We're so grateful for you taking the time to do this. You and your family are deeply loved, and we look forward to celebrating Mia's graduation this Sunday, worship. So thank you again for joining us. We're going to get some perspectives on this, but we're going to let you head out of the show now.
Okay.
I don't know. We might call you back in, although this is the problem. When you get 4 of us talking, we're almost at 9 o'clock now. So, let's kind of sum this up a little bit. We've talked about 3 different apologies or lack of apologies tonight in very similar situations. But what's up? Here, 4 pastors, we ought to know something about what makes a true Christian apology. If you're a follower of Jesus, what does that look like? What does a confession look like? Coy, why don't you start us off? What's a significant or essential component to that?
I think a central component is being able to acknowledge where you messed up or where you went wrong. Being able to verbally acknowledge that and express that in words that communicate, I'm sorry, I missed the mark, I messed up, and I need your forgiveness because I have missed the mark. I think that there's emotion attached to it. I'm not going to tell you what that emotion should look like, but there should be some emotion attached to it because you recognize that you made a mistake. You are sorry. Since most of us don't like apologizing, oftentimes it can be very difficult and very challenging to do that. And sometimes it would appear in the person who is trying to apologize that they may be struggling to actually admit and acknowledge that, hey, I have offended you or I was wrong. So I think those things kind of like go into play with it. And the last couple of things that I would say with regards to like a broken and contrite heart, you see this in text, a broken and contrite heart. I think that when a person apologizes, then that means they are not only acknowledging that they have made a mistake or they've messed up, but they are sincerely trying to do things differently in the future. And they may not be perfect at it, as Mayor Shore said, but you can legitimately see an attempt on their part to actually try to make a change from what they had done to offend somebody.
All right, Luis, what do you want to add to that? Or what do you want to disagree with Coy on?
So I find it interesting how humanity, I feel like there's a disconnect. I feel like the disconnect of systems and individual, right? So you have, I believe that people of color are screaming about the system and how the system needs to change. But then white America speaks on the individual part, right? I can't be racist because I have a black son-in-law, right? And I love him very much. That's the individual piece, but then the system. And it's just so weird to me how we can flip-flop when we want to, when it's more convenient. We speak on the system and the system and the system, but then and we hear white America individual, and we miss each other. And then when they do a public apology, they lack the individual, right? They lack the individual apology and want to systematically put an apology out in the air.
What a paradox! I never even noticed that.
I think that's funny how we could do that. It just reminds me of my dad. My dad was a hard man. Actually, I interviewed my dad yesterday on Family Life, which was kind of fun. But my dad was a hard man, and one of the things that my dad used to do, right before he gave you a whooping, he'd make you look at him in the eyes, right? He'd say, "Luis, look at me in the eyes." And then because right when you're apologizing, you're like, "I'm sorry, Dad." And you're like, you're looking down, right? And then my dad's like, no, look at me in the eyes. Because the reason why he wanted me to look at him in the eyes is he wanted to teach me, be a man and face the consequences. Be a man and face what you gotta face in life. And that's something that my dad always instilled in us. He never did it always in the best ways, but he did, in the sense of like, whenever we apologize, we look at people in the eyes. And I think that that's what's lacking in all of the apologies. I think Mayor Shore did a little bit of that with Michael Flynn, where it was kind of like the individual apology. But at the same time, like I think it's lacking in all of the apologies. You're putting these families through hell because of kids, acting on their right to protest. And, you put out this apology out in the air and never address the hurt that you put these families through. That's just, I don't know.
All right, Kurt, what do you want to add to this? What makes a true apology, confession?
Well, I think what I was struck, I'm kind of answering your question, kind of not, but I was struck, really, it was grieving to hear that. So I really appreciated, I've been following it through the news and those kind of things, but I just really appreciated her sharing. It just strikes me the obvious irony here of a Christian institution instilling biblical values of living out. Every decision is a faith decision. Every decision not done in faith is sin. These are kind of basic Christian values we have to stand up for the oppressed, and then when people go and do it, the president and the superintendent step in and they get reprimanded for it. And it just is, it's really overt. It's very overt racism. Sometimes it's harder to see racism. Sometimes we have to learn, as a white person, you have to really learn to see it. I think this is a really elementary, like, hey, if you don't see this one, you really do have a long journey ahead of you, because this one's obvious. This one's obvious. And then, what you guys said. So for them to not apologize to these kids, to these 17-year-old young men, that's just really sad, disappointing.
Yeah, you know, the only thing I want to add to what you all have said is I think, I don't know that I would expect to hear this out of Roger's mouth or out of Mayor Shore's mouth, but I think a true Christian apology starts by saying, like David said in Psalm 51, against you, God, you alone have I sinned. And in these instances, when a white Christian says, I have sinned against God by sinning against you, I sinned first against God, you are not only confessing the sin, but you are acknowledging the image of God in this brother or sister of color. And so by acknowledging that the sin is first against God, you do both the confession of the personal, the wrong, and also the validation of really ultimately whatever the sin was. Like when I sin against my wife, I'm sinning against the image of God in her.
Right.
I remember when I was in seminary and I was studying Hebrew, and studied Hebrew for 3 years. That's how much pain I like to put myself through.
Look at my face.
3 years. And I learned that when Genesis says that we were made in the image of God, that word there is the same Hebrew word that is used for an idol or an icon in a temple. So I remember the book I was reading, The Liberating Image, was talking about how basically like the story of Genesis is the story of God creating a temple, and then what's the last thing you put in the temple? You put the image of the God in the temple. And that's in large part why we idolize other human beings so quickly, because we're made in the image of God. We are the idol in the temple that describes or like represents God in the temple. And so, to the sin of racism is walking into the temple of God and desecrating the idol of God by desecrating the image of God in that person. So again, I don't know that I would expect that from someone who's not a Christian, Mayor Shore or Roger Goodall, but I would expect a Christian institution to claim that at least. And I mean, Psalm 51 is like the confession psalm, right?
Yes, it is.
Against you alone have I sinned. And David, I mean, Luis already told us that King David was a serial killer, a rapist.
You won't let it go, huh? You won't let it go.
And Psalm 51 is his confession. It's
right.
and he starts just by saying, God, I sinned against you first. I sinned against you first. So I lament that has not taken the place. And really, I guess, I want to do my own little bit of confession here that I wasn't as keyed in to that whole thing that was going down with Lansing Catholic High School. As I hear the story now, and as I kind of inherit some of the pain into my church families, I grieve that I did not follow that more closely and participate in supporting those young men. And perhaps, like, even more specifically, there's always kind of a hesitation, I think, for one pastor to critique or join in the protesting of another Christian institution. We kind of want to go behind the scenes and be quiet about it and talk, we try to follow Matthew 18 and talk first to the person, but I made no effort to do any of that. And in doing so, I think I sinned against God in not being more involved here on the local level. And I welcome the opportunity to rectify that in ministry with Marcie and her family, and really our church going deep into racial reconciliation and fighting against racism as a whole and as an institution. So there's my confession. Seems like it's an appropriate place to end a conversation. Did I do all right, guys? Is there anything I missed?
Yeah, you just got to play the song "These Are My Confessions" by Usher after this, and then
that is one perspective.
Oh man! All right. Hey friends, thank you so much for joining us on this 5th episode of Perspectives. Last week we really sprinted. We did 4 of these in a row.
Yes, we did.
That was crazy. But we're transitioning this to a weekly video podcast on Thursdays at 8 p.m. That gives us the week to worry about how many news articles or things can we work into one episode. We do these fun short takes. We've hired Alexis Rosario to short take it for us, so we'll get like she's got the hard thing of boiling what we've been talking for an hour now, or actually over an hour.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't want to listen for a whole hour, you can watch the short take. I was talking to one of my young staff members, and she was saying, "Yeah, that perspective is so good." And I said, "Well, how many did you watch?" She said, "None of them. I just watched the short takes of each one." So.
And it's Alexis Rosado.
Oh.
And Coy Boyer.
Yeah, you did mess up my name earlier.
Did I?
Said, Boyer.
Yeah. You said like the French version.
Man, I took 6 years of French, and my wife says that anytime I speak a foreign language, including Hebrew and Greek, that I do it with a French accent.
Yeah, you gave the French version of it, so it's all good. My people came from France first, so
okay, all right.
Actually, you know what? On my dad's side, this is probably gonna sound bad, but on my dad's side, they were never slaves.
Wow.
So
we'll have to unpack that in a future.
I didn't know
that.
I once met a man who said, "There's something different about you." So when I was like, it's just something different. It was another pastor. And so we were talking for a few more minutes, and about 20 minutes in, he's like, "Tell me about your people, your history." So I said, I just recently found out that on my biological dad's side, we were never slaves. He said, "That's what it is. You walk like you've been a free Negro all your life."
Wow.
But now he said, you should actually do some research on the difference between blacks in America who came over as free, never being slaves, and then those who, of course, have come through slavery and the descendants and generations, and see how they conduct themselves. What's interesting is in my family, there are lots of entrepreneurs. Lots. Even of my 4 other siblings, 3 of us are entrepreneurs.
Wow.
But my biological dad was an entrepreneur also.
Man, we've been talking for 3 years, and I'm just finding this out.
Oh.
Look at that. Look at that. Look at God. Look at God.
Friends, we're inviting you every Thursday night to join us at 8 p.m. on the congregation's Organizing for Racial Reconciliation. I think all of us found that this was a good process for us to stay connected to the news and to have the time to process it ourselves. And usually we would do that privately together, but we've decided to do it publicly every Thursday night. Because, as we have heard, this was another thing we could have talked about, the Ingham County Health Commission officially declared racism a public health crisis.
Yeah.
So we will be back next Thursday because this is a public health crisis. that we think the church needs to be involved in. So until then, friends, we want to encourage you to be well and do good. Don't you hate it? The rollout music doesn't work right now.
Yeah, it's not. Is that what it is?
It's supposed to be rollout music, but it's
Is
not.
that what it's supposed to be? Well, let's sing "Kumbaya" all
Got
together.
a little beat there, Luis.
I don't
You
know.
gotta put Usher. These are my confessions.
Oh my
Once
God.
again.
All right, friends. Peace
I
out.
appreciate you guys. Love you guys.
Take care. Love.
All right. I stopped the live stream.